Well, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. And a wonderful Shabbat it is, to say the least. What a great time we're having today. Whoa. I'd like to speak with you this morning about Yeshua and his relationship to Passover. And the passage that I'm going to be basing what I have to say to you on is a short passage. It just goes like this. Messiah, our Passover, has been sacrificed for us. It's part of a discussion that Rav Shaul had with a predominantly non-Jewish congregation, but it shows that even though there were, boundaries between Jewish covenantal life and those from among the nations who embraced Yeshua, still there was a fair amount of common understanding and perspective. That's the way it was back then. It's so interesting. But what I'd like to do is begin with a picture. Well, this is a picture of the face of the man that we find in the Shroud of Turin. Now, let me ask you a question, just so I know how much to explain. How many of you have some sense of what the Shroud of Turin is? Okay, a lot of you do. Well, that's great. Well, then you know that it is a cloth, linen cloth, interestingly with a weave that was very common in the first century. And it's a piece of cloth 14 feet long, roughly, and 3 feet wide. And on it is the image. If we were to look at it, we'd find something like that image on the left. And that is a very faint image, but an image which becomes very pronounced when it's shown in as a negative. And this goes back to 1897, when an Italian photographer named Secondo Pia was allowed to view the shroud during one of its rare exhibitions for the public. And he, in developing his pictures, looked at the negative and almost fainted when he saw the amount of anatomical detail that we find and the boldness of the image in its negative. And before going further, I just want you to notice the image and two qualities that I find, and I think maybe you'll find too. It shows a certain grandeur, loftiness, but extreme sorrow, both mixed into one. It's really quite an image. Well, let me tell you a little bit about it. I've been studying the shroud since around 1980 because when I learned about it, I was amazed by some of the things that I'll tell you now. But this is not the whole message, it's just a few minutes. What's so interesting is that the shroud image was not created by any kind of pigment. That is, there's no paint that was put on it and or any kind of dye or pigment, because the image is just on the outside of the top fibrils of the cloth. And so that begs the question, well, how did it get there? And what the scientists in 1978 and beyond who've had to looked at the shroud have said that it was created by an instantaneous burst of heat light. And that begs that raises all kinds of questions. Well, why would this particular person in this particular burial cloth, and shrouds were common in the first century, is the way you got buried back then, multiple cloths, but the big one would cover your whole body. And so it's just amazing. What I learned recently, this I did not know, when the shroud was put around a body, of course, the feet would be placed against the shroud at one point, at that fold at the bottom, and that's where the feet would be. And interestingly enough, according to a physicist that I listened to, who is intimately aware of the shroud, he says that there have been sandstone fragments trapped in the fibrils of the cloth that you only find in Jerusalem. Don't you think that's interesting? Yeah, I think that's really fascinating. There are blood stains, and the blood stains follow patterns that you would expect if it was a crucified person. The blood stains, some go this way, some the reverse, indicative, but particularly on the arms, indicative of a kind of, the writhing that a person who was being crucified would experience. It was a horrible, horrible death. I'll tell you a little more about it. The blood's AB positive, I believe. Okay. More recently, again, see, in 1978, there was a big team of scientists that investigated the shroud, but there have been techniques, photographic enhancements since then, which have shown some amazing features One of the features is, you've heard the term a widow's mite. It comes from a passage in the Bible about a widow who gave all she had, a widow's mite. Well, it's called a lepton, L-E-P-T-O-N, and this was the smallest of Roman coins, but the image on the lepton was generated or was minted between the years 29 and 32. That's rather interesting. The years 2932, and it is very distinctly a lepton which was minted by Pontius Pilate. That's a fascinating thought, too. So these things kind of come together. I didn't want to get into the whole thing about the wounds and all that too much, except to say that we absolutely know, it's been investigated. I believe John Jackson from Jewish Propulsion Laboratory looked at the wounds, and they're little barbell-shaped wounds, and there are 360 of them, 240 on the front of the body and 120 on the back, and the Roman custom was to scourge someone before crucifixion. It was just awful. But because of the angle of these little barbell things, they deduced that there were two guys, one on each side of him, and one of them was taller than the other, and you can tell by whether the barbell markings are straight or at an angle, when meaning they were upper or lower, and they were being able to deduce that. So again, there was no pigment, and what I've come to believe is that the shroud bears not only the suffering, the marks of his suffering, but also is an indication of his resurrection. And that is that the shroud was created by a process that no one has been able to duplicate, a burst of heat energy which fits the data, fits what we know from the scriptures about Yeshua rising on the first day of the week. So you take a look at that face, and you see majesty and suffering embodied in that face, and we get closer to the meaning of this phrase, Messiah, our Passover, has been sacrificed for us. So let me talk a little with you about Yeshua's story, and I'd like to characterize it at what literary types call a limit story. Now, it's a true story, but it's a limit story. So what do I mean as we think about Yeshua as the Passover lamb? Well, the thing about Yeshua is that he's not only good, but he's as good as it gets. You see, the limit, it's not just good. There are many people who are relatively good. He's as good as it gets. I mean, all he came to do, and all he's recorded as having done, is heal people and cast out demonic spirits from people and show love and concern for people who were the disenfranchised. He related to women very comfortably and naturally. He reached out to people, Samaritans. We have him speaking courageously to illegitimate political authority. That's not his main role. He wasn't a political revolutionary, but he just told the truth. And he told the truth to us, the people he loved. He told the truth about us too. So he was not just good, but he was really good. Really, really good. Now, it's a limit story. So let me tell you about the limit on the other side and what crucifixion was like. And we talked about it a little bit. It was really an awful punishment delivered to him who was truly innocent. I mean, it's amazing. And listen, I'll just say this about crucifixion. It was intended as a deterrent. The Romans, it was invented by the Greeks, I believe, but it was used a lot by the Romans. And the idea was to send a message to a populace: if you do something we don't like, this is what awaits you. Well, there you are. You have no clothes on. At least in his case. I'm not sure it was always this case, but no clothes on, so there's the shame aspect. And you're in excruciating pain because of nails that went into you. In Greek it's called the heer. It can be anywhere from here to here, but the nails end up kind of in his wrist area because the palms could not support the body weight. But also a nail through the a long nail. The nails were about this long through his feet. And what would happen to the crucified person is that your tendons and ligaments and muscles would attenuate, and more pressure was placed on the center of your body so that you couldn't breathe. And so what happened was, there you were, and after a while, in what we might call a comic dance of death, where you're up and you're down, and you're up and you're down, and you're in excruciating pain, and you can't breathe, and it's just the most awful kind of thing. And it's a limit story. The one who is truly good didn't deserve the worst of worst punishments, but that's what it was, okay? And then you have a situation where you're betrayed by your best friends. They all swear that we're with you to the end, but, we understand it, and from our perspective, we're a little sympathetic. We wonder, what would we do in that situation? But for him, they all swore that they would stick with him to the end, and yet they're gone. They're out of there. And I don't know if you've ever been betrayed before. I don't think that I've been ever betrayed, certainly not about anything serious. Maybe you have. But betrayal by someone that you trust is one of the worst things in the world, the absolute worst. So think about infidelity in marriage. I mean, there's an example that, is not uncommon. So, and here he is, the guy who kept all his promises and did only good, and he's betrayed by his closest followers. And they repent, and we know what happens. So here's another thing about his experience in this limit story of Yeshua, the Passover lamb. See, the thing is, everybody knows you're innocent. Everybody does, but no one does anything about it. That's a profound thing. Everyone knows. The government knew. The religious leaders, among our own people, what you have there is the religious leaders, those who call for his death, kind of, and along with the Roman leaders, and it's a kind of picture of the totality of humanity saying no to him and being blasé about Yeshua and not caring. So, in summary, what his experience was, we can use a name from a movie, the sum of all fears. And that's what he represents. He experiences the sum of all fears, all the things that you and I, in the deepest resources of our being, would be scared to death of and do not want to experience. He had it all. That's really what we're talking about. But then the question on this Shabbat HaGadol is why? I mean, what was the reason? And this is really important stuff. Yeshua is the supreme revelation of what God is like. And we learn that God is willing to suffer with his people, and I'll quote from Isaiah 63, "In all their afflictions he was afflicted." Now, this is an amazing thought, gang. This is really, it's why we're so happy here at Ruach, quite frankly. Because what we have is a God who's so distant than other ways of thinking about him. And in the ancient world, of course, you had the Greek and Roman gods. Well, can you trust them? Were they really good? Would they suffer for you? Lots of luck. Just try asking. They were too busy having fun, on Mount Olympus and occasionally visiting Earth and shacking up with some pretty girl, and they wouldn't care that much. At very least, we could say this: there was an unpredictability and capriciousness about the stories of the various gods. They were so much like people that the contrast between the lofty, transcendent God of Israel, who's above everything and creates everything and rules everything, and does so through the resurrected Messiah. I mean, he's so vastly, vastly beyond. Or to put it this way, there's gods. We don't have the Greek and Roman gods, but we have the God of modern secularism. And it's a God in that it's a controlling influence. It's a story about how the universe functions. And the story there is no God. Believing in God is just utterly irrational, and it just shows how weak people are to invent such a daddy figure like that. And it's a wrong view. It is an utterly wrong view. And I tell you, when you really feel it, when your kid is sick and really sick, and you go to the doctor, and the doctor says, I'm sorry, we don't know what's wrong. We can't do anything else. Let me tell you, that's when being able to pray to a good God, the God of Israel, really means something. Would you agree with that? Absolutely. Not the only time, obviously. But to know that there is a God who, in all their Israel, and by extension the world's affliction, he was afflicted, wow, and yet all-powerful. It is the most amazing, most wonderful thing. Why did Yeshua allow himself? Well, one reason, of course, is to be an example to us. He was showing us, all right, this is what love in this limit story, I mean, the extreme of love, this is what it looks like. Here's what it looks like. Here's what God is like. Here's what I'm like. I'm showing you things about the structure of the universe which you might miss. And I'm going to show you because I am going to allow my own creation to treat me terribly for a purpose. We can understand this a bit by observing the best in the human experience. I mean, just regular people. There's a movie I want to recommend to you. It's called Irina's Vow. It's the story of Irina Gut, who was a teenager living in Poland in 1939 when the Nazis, with their blitzkrieg, came in. And she wanted to be a nurse, but she was impressed into service at the home of the head Nazi officer in the town that he was stationed and in which she lived. And the story goes that initially she worked in a section of a building where there were a dozen Jewish people who were put to work as tailors. Now, they weren't tailors. There was a lawyer, there was a doctor, there was, various professional people from that city. And she got to like them and appreciate them. And then she learned that the Nazis were going to destroy the ghetto, and all the Jews were going to be sent east to, sent to the gas chambers. And so she, and this is documented. It's a documented story. She was then asked or told by the colonel, who was the top officer, he said, I want you, you're very organized, I see your organizational ability, I want you to become the caretaker of my villa. The Nazis came, it happened to be owned by a Jewish family, a rich Jewish family, and he commandeered the villa and wanted her to take care of the house and to host parties for him and his Nazi friends. Well, she agreed to do that, but what she did is in the middle of the night managed to take the 12 Jews who were hiding, or who were working in this as tailors, and in the dead of night she took them to that house and hid them in the cellar. The colonel would come home, he would have parties. The Jews are in the cellar of his own home. She risked it all. Now, that's all I'm going to say about the movie, but see Irina's Vow. You won't be sorry. And again, it is a true story. At the end of the movie, you meet the real people, etc. So Yeshua came to show us what love looked like. But there's something more. He was more than an example. He was an offering of atonement for Israel's sin and for the sins of the world. And now we're in mysterious territory about the transactional nature there. What's going on? How does that all work? We have pictures of it. We have intimations of how it all works from the offering of animals. The animal gives its life so that the people may live. But there's a much deeper thing going on here, and I'm not going to take the time now to explore it much more deeply, except to say that Yeshua is more than a great example. He gives his life as an atonement. And by analogy, Messiah, our Passover, is a clear reference to the Lamb which gave its life so that its blood would be put on the door and so that we could live. We're talking about the Black Death, not the Black Death, the angel of death passing through the cities, through Egypt, and we were protected from that. So Messiah is our Passover, not just as a moral example, but we've got the mystery of atonement, and it is just an amazing thing. Animal sacrifice provides kind of a partial key into what it's all about, but there's mysterious elements that are worth thinking deeply about, but it's very difficult to penetrate completely. The point is we needed atonement, and Messiah Yeshua, the truly innocent one, the unblemished lamb, if you will, he pays the price. And I believe it's on Monday that there's a red heifer. Do you know about the red heifer thing? You familiar with it? Yeah. So red heifer, so according to the Torah, it says that making atonement involves a red cow that has no white or discolored fur. And so there's a guy in Texas, a rancher, who breeded a red heifer. There's more than one, there's a few of them, and they're in Israel, and they'll be offered. Well, whatever the spiritual significance of that might be, and I suppose we'll find out perhaps, it pales in significance, absolutely pales in significance to Yeshua, the Passover lamb who gave himself. And that's so important to keep in mind. Now, I'd like to close with one more picture. So what we have here is Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall is the most famous Jewish painter of the 20th century. And a number of Ruach people, Ralph and Michelle, Sue, myself, some others, went to the Jewish Museum on Broadway and 92nd Street. This was several years ago because there was a big Chagall exhibit. And one whole room was filled with Chagall's pictures, which featured the crucified Yeshua. And it was so interesting because most people who come are Jewish people, and to experience the looks on the faces and the cognitive dissonance was really wild. You know, why did he take the ultimate iconic image of associated with Christianity, and why did he build it in, make it part of his paintings? And just generally speaking, the most famous one of the paintings is called White Crucifixion. Perhaps you've seen that. This one is called The Exodus. It was finished in 1965. And I want to show you this. What we have is the Exodus. That's the name of the picture. And do you see the throngs of people leaving, throngs of Jewish people? And it was a mixed multitude. You had some people from Egypt who said, I'm with you. And so you see that, and they're all coming out. Now here's Moses in the front right. Now, of course, we associate Moses with the Exodus. He's the main guy. But in Chagall's picture, it's interesting. He's illuminated, so obviously a very important person. And he's got Torah scroll. He's got the scroll of the Torah, meaning the Ten Commandments. But who is that right at the top center? That's Yeshua, right? Isn't that interesting? Well, Chagall was not a Messianic Jew. There's no reason to think he was. Maybe he was in his heart, who knows, but he used the image, multiple images that seem disparate and unconnected to express something of a dreamlike quality in many of his pictures. In this case, I think what he's saying, and he writes about this a little bit, that Yeshua, to him, is part of the Jewish experience and the suffering of the Jewish people, which had been characterized much of our history from the Exodus on, that Yeshua is part of that. So it's an image of the unpredictability of life, and Anatefka, the whole thing, and the Holocaust, obviously. And so Yeshua identifies with us. But you know how art is, there's always a subjective element in how you interpret things. What I see in this, intended by Marc Chagall or not, is the centrality of Yeshua to Passover. He is the ultimate Passover lamb. So, as we gather together at our Seders, I want to encourage you all to see yourself led forth by Moses, certainly, but the Geulah, the redemption, which we could say, in a sense, began with Moses at the first Pesach, will ultimately come about because of Yeshua, Israel's greatest son, when he returns not as a lamb, but as the leader of our people and the entire world, who will make everything right. I leave you with that thought on this Shabbat Hagadol, and I say to you all, Shabbat Shalom.